The film begins in an abandoned coal mine. Outside the mine, we find a little boy named Aiden playing alone, and suddenly he hears a strange sound. He decides to run quickly back to his father, Frank Weaver's car, who arrives at that very moment carrying a toolbox. His father reassures him, telling him not to worry about those sounds because they are nothing. Then he tells Aiden to wait in the car and not move until he comes back, before entering one of the mine's tunnels. Inside the mine, Frank and his partner have set up a small lab where they manufacture illegal things. As they talk, they hear strange, suffocated noises coming from the mine's tunnels. They try to escape the place but are brutally attacked by a strange creature with sharp claws and antlers like a deer's on its head. The story then jumps forward 3 weeks, and we begin following the story of a school teacher named Julia Meadows. We see her in the school bathroom, clearly struggling with her thoughts and feeling unsettled. She returns to her classroom and begins talking to her students about how people pass down knowledge and culture through storytelling. After class ends, we see a little boy named Lucas. His classmates bully him, putting a doll with a painted face on him and mocking him. The boy walks home alone, looking broken and distressed. On the way, he spots a small skunk and kills it with a rock, then takes it home with him. When Lucas arrives home, he stands before a door secured with 2 large locks, making sure everything is quiet behind it before he unlocks it and enters. In another scene, we see Julia at a small supermarket, her eyes catching a few bottles of liquor on the shelf. She almost gives in to the urge to buy them, but restrains herself at the last moment and returns home. At her house, Julia listens to a radio program announcing the local government's plan to reopen some old coal mines. She approaches the old piano in her living room, recalling terrible memories of how her father used to abuse her. Suddenly, her brother Paul, the town's sheriff, appears, and they talk about her day at school. Julia tells him things are not going as she expected. Paul notices her looking at the piano and asks if she wants him to get rid of it. She simply says no. Later, Paul leaves, and Julia removes a few pictures of her father from the wall before leaving as well. At Lucas's home, he looks at family photos, then angrily rips the head off the doll his classmates left in his bag. Suddenly, we hear footsteps approaching from behind the locked door, followed by a rough, strange voice calling out to the boy, and then loud banging on the door as if something inside was trying to break free. The next day in class, Julia asks Lucas to stand up and share the story he's been writing. Hesitant, he takes out a notebook filled with grim drawings and tells a story about 3 bears living together. The biggest bear becomes sick, irritable, and arrogant because of the lack of food, yet they are still together. The gloomy atmosphere of the story shocks the class into silence. Afterward, one of the bullies discovers someone put dog feces in his bag. When he sees Lucas staring at him from afar, he decides to attack him and tries to shove his face into it. Lucas gets hurt and is taken to the school clinic. Julia watches over him anxiously, worried about the boy's condition, and opens his file to get his home phone number. She tries to call, but in the house, all we see is a pair of dark eyes staring through the keyhole of the locked door. Leaving school, Julia spots Lucas walking alone, as usual. She decides to follow him and sees him standing in front of an ice cream shop, sadly watching people inside enjoying themselves. Julia approaches him and invites him to join her. Slowly, she gains his trust to learn more about his life. She asks about his family, and he gradually reveals that his mother is dead and his brother stopped going to school to take care of their father. When she asks what his father does for a living, Lucas abruptly says he must go and begs her not to follow him again. Later, Lucas notices birds circling around something. When he gets closer, he finds a dead animal in his path and takes it home to feed his family. At the same time, Julia decides to visit Lucas's house. From the outside, it looks neglected. She knocks on the door, but notices it's already ajar. Julia peeks inside, but upon hearing shouting and violent banging from some ferocious thing within, she quickly runs back to her car and drives away. At her home, Julia pieces together scraps of Lucas's drawings, one of which depicts a frightened man trapped inside a monster. Suddenly, her brother Paul arrives, startling her. He asks about the drawing and criticizes her work, reproaching her with regret. Julia apologizes, admitting she abandoned him when they were young, running away from home. She tells him she has spent her life trying to cope with the truth of her escape. He responds that he too has spent his life waiting for his sister to come back before leaving her again. Meanwhile, Lucas cuts pieces of meat from the dead animal he found and places them on a tray. Using a flashlight to illuminate the pitch-dark room upstairs, he sets the tray on the floor. Suddenly, Frank lunges at the food like an animal, looking filthy and disheveled. He yells at his son to get out of the room before retreating back into the darkness. Moments later, his younger brother Aiden appears, looking calmer and gentler, but just as dirty and neglected as their father. Aiden eats while Frank yells again, causing Lucas to run from the room. The little boy then fixes one of the locks on the door and secures it again. In another scene, Julia plays the piano at her house, and memories of her father's abuse overwhelm her, leaving her shaken. Suddenly, Paul appears, accidentally startling her again and pulling her back to reality. He says he wants to reconcile and clear things between them. Julia asks him about Frank, Lucas's father, and Paul tells her he has arrested him several times before on various charges. Julia explains that the drawing belonged to Frank's son. Paul responds that Frank is a drug addict. Julia recounts her experience visiting Frank's house, and Paul scolds her for such reckless behavior. And we return to Lucas's house, and we find him drawing another one of his sketches, and he hears Aiden calling him, telling him that he's hungry. Lucas simply puts on his headphones and hugs his doll, compensating for the affection he lacks from his family. The next morning, Lucas sets up a small trap to catch an animal, and suddenly he feels that someone is near him. And indeed, close to him we see a hunter standing terrified as he sees a human corpse that looks burned. The hunter runs away from the place, and Lucas also walks away. At school, Julia rummages through Lucas's desk drawer, looking for any extra information about the boy. She finds books about animal traps, a book called Dangerous Spirits, and his sketchbook. Julia shows the sketchbook to the school principal, Aileen, and begs her to do something to help the boy. The principal says that at the nearest opportunity she will go and check out Frank's situation. Then Julia sees Paul on the street talking to the hunter who reported the corpse he found, half of it in the forest and the other half in the mine, and we return to Lucas, who goes upstairs to talk to his brother. They talk together while their father's struggling noises can be heard in the background. Lucas gives Aiden some candy, and after Aiden eats a piece, he starts coughing and blood comes out of his eyes and mouth. Frank appears very affected by the scene, and hot light begins to shine from inside his chest. This sight terrifies Lucas and makes him run away. Paul takes the corpse they found to the morgue, which turned out to be Frank's partner. The coroner examines the deformed body and says that the mutilation is impossible to have been done by an animal. Most likely a human did this. This makes Paul very worried about the situation. At the same time, the school principal goes to Frank's house to try to communicate with him, but it seems that no one is at home. At school, Julia is playing a movie for the whole class, and Lucas is sitting carving a piece of wood into the shape of a deer's head. And we return to Frank's house. Aileen, the principal, as she enters the place, begins to smell a very foul odor. She keeps calling out for anyone until she hears Aiden crying, so she decides to go in and see what's happening. She finds him filthy, with traces of blood on his body, and she tries to help him, but suddenly Frank attacks her from behind and knocks her to the ground. She tries to escape, but Frank begins eating her slowly and kills her. Afterwards, he begins a sort of transformation, and antlers start to grow and split through his mouth. Then the police arrive at the mine entrance to investigate the area. Inside, they find many drug bags hanging and antlers similar to deer antlers, but the hunter says he has never seen antlers shaped like that before. Paul receives a phone call about a new report of a missing person, so he immediately leaves the place with the rest of the men. Meanwhile, Lucas is walking along the train tracks going home, and suddenly the school bully blocks his way and tries to pick a fight with him. Lucas tries to get away from him, but suddenly a humanoid monster with antlers on its head appears and attacks the bully. Lucas seizes the opportunity and runs away, going back home. When he arrives, he sees Aileen's car. When he notices the house, he notices a blood trail in the hallway leading to a broken window. Lucas tries to hide all the traces. He covers Aileen's car and cleans the blood off the ground. At the same time, Paul asks Julia about Aileen, and she tells him she saw her yesterday. Paul explains that her husband reported her missing, and Julia remembers that Aileen told her she would go talk to Frank about Lucas's situation. Paul takes another officer with him, and they go to Frank's house, but no one answers them, so they decide to leave and come back later. At school, Paul talks to one of the teachers about another student who has also been reported missing. Paul says it might just be coincidences, and these words make Julia very angry. As she leaves the classroom, Julia notices Lucas standing there with expressions of extreme fear drawn on his face, so she decides to return to Frank's house again to investigate. There, she finds Aileen's car covered. The police arrive and find Aileen's corpse in the attic of the house, her skin and flesh eaten away. They also find remains of another body, charred from the inside and opened up like a cocoon. Lucas arrives home, but Julia prevents him from entering and takes him to the hospital so they can examine him and monitor his condition. The doctor says he might have a psychological disorder and shows signs of torture. When asked about Lucas's future, Julia says she will adopt him since he has no one. While waiting at the hospital, Lucas remembers everything he went through since his father returned from the mine. In a flashback, we see that Frank had started to transform gradually, and he did everything he could to protect his children. He was the one who put the locks on the attic door and asked them to lock him inside and never open it, no matter what he did or asked for. After a few days, Aiden also began to get sick, and Frank, whose appearance had changed drastically, dragged him into the room with him. We return to Paul and Julia, who go to the hunter to ask him about the things they found that might be connected to the disappearances in the mine. They show him the drug bags and Lucas's drawings. The hunter brings a book and begins explaining that what's in the mine is a monster mentioned in the legends of the Native Americans, called Wendigo. It is a demonic creature that devours human flesh. He says it is a spirit that is always hungry and constantly searches for new victims. According to the hunter, the only way to destroy this creature is to stop its heart when it is weak and starving, but he warns them that the spirit never truly dies. It only looks for a new body to inhabit, a new host. Paul then receives a phone call about a body found on the train tracks. The body turns out to be Clint, the bully who had previously been attacked. Like the others, he had been devoured and torn in half, leaving everyone terrified. Paul still struggles to believe that something supernatural is happening, which frustrates Julia. She insists he take her to the hospital. There, she finds Lucas and takes him back home with her. At the same time, one of the officers arrives at Paul's house. Paul tells him he's finishing a meeting with the mayor and asks him to search around the house. Meanwhile, Julia talks to Lucas about his family and his father's death. She tells him Frank is dead, but the boy replies, "No, that was my old father, the sick one. Now he's with Aiden, and he needs my help, because I will feed him, and he will be happy again." He shows Julia drawings of the creature and tells her that it will come for him to take him to live in the mine with his brother. At that moment, the officer outside guarding the house hears noises coming from the barn. He radios Paul, who immediately gets into his car and rushes back. Meanwhile, Julia tries to protect Lucas inside the house. The officer goes to investigate the barn and finds something moving inside a crate. As he approaches, he discovers it's Aiden. He radios Paul to report it, but suddenly the monster attacks him from behind, piercing through his back with brutal force and killing him instantly. Paul arrives at the scene and cautiously enters. Julia sees her brother arrive and is worried for him. Lucas takes advantage of her distraction and runs away. Paul approaches the barn and finds his colleague dead on the ground, just like what happened to his first partner. When he sees Aiden, the Wendigo attacks him, throwing him across the barn with immense strength before disappearing. Paul tries to recover from the blow, but soon hears the Wendigo returning. It charges at him, smashing through the barn wall and piercing his arm. Paul fights back, striking it several times with the tool he manages to grab, but the blows have little effect. The creature overpowers him, knocking him unconscious before fleeing again. Julia approaches the barn to check on her brother, helping him with his wounds. She tells him the monster has taken Lucas to the mines and that she's going after them. The two head toward the mines. As soon as they arrive, Julia calls for an ambulance for her brother, then enters the mine alone with only a flashlight and a gun. Paul enters cautiously into the mine, calling out for Lucas. She keeps walking through the dark tunnel, smelling a foul odor. A bit further ahead, she finds the boys, and Lucas tells her to go back. But when she looks beside her, Julia sees the huge monster eating a bear. On the monster's face, the skin of Frank is still hanging like a mask. Julia gets terrified and fires several shots at the monster, which attacks her and knocks her to the ground. She gets up, grabs the gun again, and shoots blindly without knowing exactly where the monster is. Suddenly, the monster appears behind her and knocks her down again. Julia's hand finds a flare signal on the ground, so she lights it up. which distracts the monster for a while. She then picks up an iron rod and keeps stabbing the Wendigo in the chest several times. She manages to drive the rod into its chest, but the monster pulls it out and staggers toward Julia. Suddenly, Lucas stabs a knife into its back, and the monster falls to the ground, unconscious. Julia takes the knife and keeps stabbing the Wendigo's chest until finally she reaches its heart. She pulls the monster's heart out of its chest, but its heat burns her and she throws it to the ground. At that same moment, they hear Aiden screaming in a horrifying way. They see him starting to transform like his father before. Julia takes the knife and approaches Aiden to stop the transformation, but Lucas stops her, believing his brother might be cured. Julia convinces him that there is no hope of saving Aiden anymore. She hugs the boy and then drives the knife into his heart, ending his life and his suffering. The next day on a sandwich, Julia and Paul talk about Lucas's fate. Julia says she will stay with him for a while, and Paul tells her that he knows what the boy will turn into in the future and asks if she will have the courage to kill something she loves. She simply takes the boy into her arms and starts walking away from the place. But suddenly, Paul begins coughing, showing clearly that he has been infected and will become the new host for the Wendigo. The end of the film, and we'll meet again in a new summary. Thank you for watching this.